The Bob Murphy Show, episode 399.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. Today I'm speaking with Chris Barnard, who is the president of the American Conservation Coalition. And they're a conservative organization that teaches conservative Americans that, hey, there's not an inherent conflict between caring about the environment and being politically conservative. I think that's plenty of intro, and the conversation we have is pretty self-explanatory, but it's very interesting. Chris and I have very similar perspective on these issues, and I think you'll enjoy it. Chris, welcome to the Bob Murphy Show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So as the listeners would have heard in the pre-recorded intro, you are the president of the American Conservation Coalition. So I guess the natural first thing to ask is, what is that?
Yeah, so we were founded in 2017 to build what we call the conservative environmental movement. Mm-hmm. Our view is that once upon a time, conservatives were actually the ones who led on conservations around the environment, the outdoors, conservation. If you look to, for example, Teddy Roosevelt, I've got him right behind me here on the poster. He was known as the conservation president. He started a lot of this movement, and hunters and farmers and ranchers were the original conservationists, and it was more about a lifestyle thing than it was about a political label. But in the last few decades, really, it's become more of a left-wing issue. You have Democrats, like organizations on the left, young people who've really prioritized environmental and climate issues. And for most of that time in the last few decades, conservatives have retreated from the conversation. And ACC was founded to really plug that gap and say that actually conservatives not only care, but we believe that we have solutions that are better because our solutions are rooted in innovation and markets and free enterprise. And that's the way that you truly solve some of these challenges, not through top-down mandates and market regulation. So that's kind of what we do in a nutshell. We have over 75,000 young members across the country on hundreds of college campuses, and we're really truly building a grassroots movement of young people who care about this but are not on the left; they're on the right.
Okay, great, and and just for my listeners, they'll be familiar. I have more of a libertarian than a conservative audience, Chris, but like, for example, Walter Block is a big libertarian economist, and he has a whole book on free market environmentalism, and even Murray Rothbard, who's one of the giants in libertarian theory. I mean, he would take pains to say it's not that the libertarian position is pro-business or something, and in fact, there were a lot of regulations in the early 1900s where like local courts would like give factories the right to dump chemicals in the river because, it's good for business. You know what I mean? Where it's a violation of property rights under the common law and stuff. So anyway, there is a tradition among libertarians too to say that we shouldn't be ceding concern for the environment to leftist progressives as if you got to choose between do you like products or do you like nature, and that's a false dichotomy.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of what capitalism is about, a lot about what markets are about, is about the revealed preferences of individuals and communities. And that can sometimes mean people want to put aside some of their income to protect a local park or to donate to whatever environmental charity they care about. And I think it's a very weird dichotomy that we've come into. It's like, if you care about the environment, you must therefore be a big government leftist, when actually you can be a small government person who believes that actually the best way to do this is by empowering communities, local actors, and businesses, as opposed to outsourcing that to bureaucrats. And so it is weird that you've had that false choice, and we're, I guess, part of the movement to try and redress that, both with conservatives, but also with people that are more libertarian minded as well.
can you, this might be a weird question, but from your perspective, like for one thing, I'm just curious, like how did you personally get attracted to this? Or was it more, were you more of a like conservative first, then you realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm allowed to care about the environment? Or were you more of an environmental person and then realized conservatism was the best way to, achieve those concern or objectives?
So it was kind of neither, because I grew up as a kid who always loved the outdoors. I just loved hiking and camping and skiing. I like have vivid memories with my friends battling imaginary orcs in the forest, and just such a passion for the outdoors and wanting to protect that. That I think was combined with the fact that I was born in 1998. Like people my generation, my age, like this is one of those like topics du jour, right? It's like the zeitgeist of Gen Z, that they care about these issues. And so I just always had like a strong consciousness of like, I want to protect the environment. I love the environment. I want to pass it on to future generations. And that was a value I held. At the same time, another passion I had was politics. Like growing up, we can talk about this maybe later, but I grew up in Belgium. My mom's American, my dad's Dutch. My parents are both involved in kind of journalism, and my dad's an author and public speaker. My first ever internship I did was with NATO. So it's kind of like in and around politics and those issues growing up. And for as long as I can remember, I considered myself to be a conservative. Like that was the worldview that I developed for myself. And it just felt weird having those two passions side by side, right? Being a conservative on the one hand, and then also really caring about the outdoors on the other hand. And for a while I would tell myself, oh, I'm a conservative on everything except for the environment. That's where I'm more left wing. Like that's the glaring gap in like the conservative worldview. That was obviously because no one was talking about it. I wasn't being taught about famous conservative scholars working on environmental issues, or conservative politicians weren't really talking about it. And so it felt like a very awkward tension for me. And so I just said, okay, well, I'm just more left wing on this issue because conservatives just don't care about it or don't talk about it. Over time, as I learned more about it, just broadly in terms of conservative philosophy, but also in terms of kind of like the actual history of these issues, I realized that, oh, actually, it is like something that conservatives do care about. Philosophically, conservative and conservation are the same root word, right? Like you want to conserve the world around you, not just the institutions and traditions and morals, but also the physical world around you, and pass that on. And that's something that is kind of, from my perspective, an inherent good. And so I realized that you can actually reconcile those two. They're not even just mutually exclusive; they're actually mutually reinforcing from my perspective. But again, like I said earlier, we've outsourced it to the left for so long, and so it was just really important for conservatives to kind of build a counterbalance to that. And so that's how I came to the movement: is I care about this issue. I'm a conservative. No one else is talking about this, so I guess I better start talking about it.
Okay. Do you remember even at this point, like was it you came across a particular thinker or something, or you saw a presentation, you realized, oh, wait a minute, this dichotomy doesn't need to exist? Or in your, like, were you the pioneer in terms of your own perspective on this, and then later you found allies?
I think it was a combination of those different factors. Just one philosopher who was very impactful, a guy called Roger Scruton, is a famous kind of conservative British philosopher. Many people call him kind of the Edmund Burke of kind of modern conservatism. And he wrote a book called Green Philosophy, which talked about the importance of conservation as a conservative principle, and talks about it from an innovation pro-community perspective, as opposed to like a big government top-down thing. And so that was formative for me for sure. Looking through history, realizing that like in America, a lot of the major things that have happened throughout American history were led, like on this issue, were led by conservatives or Republicans. That's something that also kind of changed my mind. And then it was also just looking at the mainstream climate and environmental movement and seeing how much they got it wrong on such important issues. Like the environmental movement has shut down nuclear plants for decades, and we've seen that kind of come to its heights recently with Germany and California and New York. And I was sitting there being like, well, these people say they care about this, but then they're shutting down things like nuclear plants, or they're unable to like manage the forests and actually like reduce wildfires. And I just realized the extent to which a lot of the environmental movement is hijacked by specific progressive political priorities and an ideological agenda, as opposed to practical solutions that actually work. And so I think it was that combination of being mugged by reality, seeing like the philosophical things actually make a lot of sense, and then the historical examples that all show that, hey, like, why are we letting the other side win on this issue when clearly we're the ones that have kind of the upper hand?
Mm-hmm. On the nuclear power one, is your point that zero carbon emissions, and so if we need to, is that what you meant? Was why would the left be
partly right? Partly is it like obviously the left's like big thing is they want to get to net zero and all that kind of stuff, and so shutting down the largest source of clean electricity is very silly, especially if it's a baseload power source. So that's one part of it. But nuclear has many environmental components, like benefits to it, even beyond the carbon piece of it, right? Like just basic like air pollution. There's no air pollution from nuclear. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Obviously, environmentalists will talk about like the radiation and the spent nuclear fuel and all those things. I think those are non-issues that you can kind of quite easily debunk, and happy to talk about that if you'd like. But then also from a pure land use perspective, like if you want to actually have more energy and more clean energy, then the way that you would ideally want to do that is by having a minimal footprint on the amount of land you use, the amount of resources you use. And nuclear is just by far the most efficient there. It has a 93% capacity factor, so you can like run it basically 24/7. It's a very physically small use of land, and so that allows you to spare more land for conservation purposes or other purposes. And the amount of material input is actually very low compared to other things, like, for example, like wind turbines and solar panels. Mm-hmm. And so it just didn't make sense to me from all of those different environmental perspectives that the environmental movement would oppose nuclear.
Yeah, and the base load factor, like I know from my work, we were chatting, Chris, before we started about how I did work for the Institute for Energy Research, and there I did a lot of work on the production tax credit and stuff like that. And yeah, that was a big thing in a lot of the pro wind and solar movements, their literature and whatnot. A lot of the times they would overlook the intermittency problem, the fact that, they could show, oh yeah, and under ideal circumstances when the sun is shining and blah, 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 then solar's pretty effective. But even if you had as much solar as you could, you still had to have like a natural gas backup because, sometimes the sun's not shining or sometimes it's night, So anyway, stuff like that where a lot of the things got screwed up. And so, yes, I guess that would be one of the benefits of nuclear besides the other things is that, yeah, that it's the conditions don't have to be just right in order to run the plant.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. And if you look at the places that have gotten rid of nuclear and what that's been replaced with, it's actually not wind and solar. It's being replaced more often by like gas peaker plants or importing fossil fuels from elsewhere. Like Germany started just importing like gas from Russia that is obviously it's like dirtier than nuclear, but it's also significantly dirtier than like gas that they might be able to import from America, which they also turned down. So it's just like none of this makes sense. Like in California, when they run out of power because they've basically created an extremely unreliable grid, they have to import power from elsewhere, and often they'll be like peaker plants that use coal in Utah, right? So again, from like their own standards, it falls under the weight of its contradiction, and so it's just one of those baffling things where I realize, and I think a lot of people are now realizing as well, that much of the environmental movement was just not serious. It was just a Trojan horse for a bunch of ideas that have nothing to do with the environment.
Okay, yeah, so I was debating whether to ask you that kind of a question because I didn't know if you wanted to shy away from attributing bad motives to some of your opponents perhaps, but yeah, in my work, like that's, again, you got to evaluate arguments on their merits and so forth, but there were a lot of statements from people, like, in other words, they were just coming out and saying, like, I don't know if this is on your radar, Chris, but Naomi Klein had a piece one time where she explained why she was embracing the climate change movement. And I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not putting words in her mouth. She was literally said, yeah, when I was younger as an activist, I didn't really care about the global warming, climate change stuff, that just because I thought, sexism and racism and all these other things were just so much more important. Social issues, income inequality. But then when I realized that, again, she was saying by embracing the climate change narrative and what the activists were demanding in the name of averting or slowing climate change, she could get all those other things she wanted. Because really, she wanted to drive a stake in the heart of capitalism and, the profit motive and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, and there's, statements from people at the UN and whatnot of similar lines that ultimately the only way we're going to save the planet is by replacing capitalism and stuff. So you do start to see, oh, okay, maybe that does fill in some of these gaps as to why it doesn't make sense on their own terms. Like, why would you guys be embracing nuclear power? Well, if you think people use too much energy, that's why.
Right. Well, I'm a big believer in taking people at their word and listening to what they themselves say about the things they believe. And you see, like, you heard some of AOC's staff, like obviously AOC, Congresswoman from New York, who introduced the Green New Deal, I believe in 2017. She had staffers who admitted publicly that it was never originally a climate thing at all. I think that's a literal quote, because they realized that there's a bunch of different priorities that they care about. And I'm sure climate is one of them, but there's all these other priorities. And because of the kind of momentum and energy and kind of youthful support behind like tackling climate change and kind of coming up with like a solutions to that, they found that it was a very effective vehicle for their other priorities as well. And so I highly encourage people to read the Green New Deal. I believe it's actually only 14 pages. And for every one word they have about like climate and the environment, they have 10 words about universal healthcare, racial justice, jobs guarantees, like just all kinds of like priorities that have nothing to do with the environment. And like, you might say that they're important priorities, sure, but you're using something called the Green New Deal to kind of make a climate argument that you're trying to smuggle all these other things in. And we saw some of this happen like in the last administration, where the Biden EPA was giving environmental justice grants to organizations that would say things on their website like climate justice runs through a free Palestine.
Yeah.
It's like we're giving millions and sometimes even billions of dollars of taxpayer money to organizations that somehow conflate like the Israel-Palestine conflict with tackling climate change. It's just completely fundamentally unserious. Like other groups like the Sunrise Movement was protesting outside the Supreme Court when Roe v. Wade was overturned, because they believe that climate justice and a woman's right to choose are somehow kind of two sides of the same coin. Like none of it makes sense.
Right.
And I'm not denying that there are probably many people that are kind of wrapped up in those movements who genuinely care about climate change, but a lot of the leadership and the people pushing a lot of this clearly care about things that are far beyond just climate change, and they're not doing a very good job at kind of parsing those priorities from each other.
Yeah, it's funny. I agree wholeheartedly, Chris. And then you said the Green New Deal, and that triggered. I haven't thought about that in a while, but yeah, I did a ton of that when that was like, the hot item. And I believe I think it was something like an early draft of the legislation that wasn't the one that ended up being submitted, got leaked. I don't know if it was leaked or just, it was on their website and they took it down when groups like the ones I was working with got a hold of it. We're like, what the heck is it? But there was stuff in there like about indigenous peoples and you know what I mean? There was all kinds of stuff in there. Like you say, that in and of itself, yeah, we can have a discussion about, that as a social policy, but clearly not something you would think of in terms of, oh yeah, the climate is at risk here, or, we got to watch out for the Earth's average temperature in 2100, and then it has something to do with indigenous peoples. So anyway, okay, well, maybe you can speak on your website. I noticed you guys have the Market Environmentalism Academy, and you have some free courses. Can you maybe tell the listeners what that is and maybe give them a little commercial as to why they should go check that out?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, as part of starting this movement, realized there was just not a lot of education pushing back against things like the Green New Deal, or against the idea that we need just like big government programs to help solve some of these problems. And so we created an online academy called the Market Environmentalism Academy. People can go find it at marketacademy.eco. And it just has I think 20 free courses on a bunch of different topics, highlighting kind of what a market-based pro-innovation approach to environmental issues looks like. And so you'll find everything from courses on nuclear energy to like natural gas to battery storage. Like there's a bunch of different energy related courses. Each of those courses will have a video with an expert, a few short quizzes and some reading. So it takes about an hour or so to complete in your own time. But we also have other courses on what's the faith-based approach to environmental issues? What's the role of hunters and farmers and people like that in conservation? There's all kinds of different courses on anything that kind of falls under a broad environmental kind of bucket, and that highlights a different approach than what you'll typically find either on the internet or in college classes or from other organizations. Okay,
great. Maybe, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there like or one or two pet examples of things you like for like the average rank and file conservative who just never thought of this before and kind of, I grew up on Rush Limbaugh and he kind of used to make fun of the environmentalists and, Al Gore's an idiot and blah, blah, blah. AOC's a buffoon. But, and so is there, I don't know, are there any things in terms of like, here's what the left says and here's why conservatism just shows this is the better approach on something?
Yeah, so we have a course on the role of capitalism in protecting the environment. We have a course on the role of property rights and free markets in protecting the environment. And the goal is to show that economic growth and environmental protection aren't actually antithetical to one another. I think, to your point earlier, some people just don't want us to use more energy or to build more things. They kind of have a degrowth mindset that says, oh, economic productivity and economic growth are inherently bad for the environment. The data is actually very clear that that's not true. As economies and people grow richer, sure, they'll have an impact on the environment. There's no denying that. But over time, once they reach a certain level of GDP and prosperity, their impact on the environment actually goes down. That's because people have disposable income to think about we'll create a national park or we'll have a local park in the city or whatever it might be. They're no longer worrying about where their next meal is coming from or having a roof above their head. They can think about these other things, donating money to conservation groups, like having taxpayer money be spent on certain initiatives, whatever it might be. That is one aspect to it. But also from an innovation and efficiency aspect, once you have a prosperous enough economy, you can come up with cool innovations that reduce the impact that you have on the environment. One example I love to give is the USB stick. One of the best things we've ever done to stop cutting down trees is use a USB stick. So we don't have to print everything. We can just have thousands and thousands of pages of document on this little device that we just plug into our laptops. That's much more effective than printing it all. And so those are the kinds of innovations that are driven by economic growth, not by scarcity. And so those courses just highlight that the kind of anti-growth, big government approach to those issues fails on its own merits, and that the pro-capitalism, pro-property rights approach is actually what is the most effective.
Great. Perhaps relevant. When I was in college, Chris, I was on the debate team for a couple of years. And one year the resolution was, it was something about what to do about the oceans, the world's oceans. And I forget the exact resolution, but when it was my partner, when it was our turn to do the affirmative case, we made the case to privatize the oceans, including all the fish and stuff like that. And as a young budding libertarian, I was an economics major, and we did and we never lost presenting that because the other side they thought that was such a nutty idea that they weren't prepared. And then we just had all kinds of facts and logic, and it's well, no, I mean, what happened? How come the bison went extinct? It's because they weren't owned. And you don't worry about running out of cows, right? Because if there's private ranchers who own them, then that's their stock and blah, blah, blah. And there's cases too that I'm sure the white rhino and stuff like that was endangered in Africa when it was under state control and management, but then because of poaching and whatever. But once they privatized it, then they had an incentive to really make sure poachers didn't get in there. And so anyway, there's all kinds of examples of when things are run through markets and private property, you get more of it, whereas when it's controlled by the government, quote, protected by the government, it languishes.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And there's really powerful examples of where species have been brought back. The bison was nearly extinct in America, and one of the reasons that we were able to bring it back is you had ranchers like Ted Turner who created a business out of ranching and having bison on the land that he then sells through Ted's Montana Grill or whatever it's called, and they have an economic incentive to kind of revitalize the population and keep it healthy. And we've seen similar things with fishing, when all the fish in places like Iceland, for example, there are these issues that the fish were being overfished, right? Because no one owned it, so everyone wanted to just get as much as they possibly could before others would, and so it was a race to the bottom. What they ended up doing is they attributed what was called individual tradable quotas, or ITQs, to fishermen, and so they would have a percentage of the catch would be allowed for them to harvest, and if they weren't going to use all of it, they could sell some of the quota to someone else or not use it or whatever it might be. But the idea is that they had an incentive to not overfish, because then that would reduce their ability to have long-term fishing supplies. And so there's all kinds of reasons why incentives and markets actually are more effective, because it becomes a positive sum equation as opposed to a zero something of how can I just extract as much as I possibly can before someone else does. If you do it that way, that's essentially kind of the communist system, right? Like you had the USSR that depleted entire ecosystems because they had no reason to incentivize conservation, so they were just like pillaging the land. And we've shown time and again that just simply doesn't work. Incentives are what matter.
Yeah, and on that example, I mean, we were talking about nuclear power earlier, and somebody might say, "Oh, but what about?" And they say, "What?" And you say, 3 Mile Island, really, in the grand scheme, wasn't a big deal. Chernobyl was a big deal, but that certainly isn't the fault of capitalism. You know, that happened under the Soviets. So again, just illustrating your point.
Right.
And also things like I know, like clear cutting forests and things that people a lot of times would lament in certain places in South America. And if you go and look at it, it's not that there were private logging companies that own the forest, and just like you don't need to worry about people cutting down all the apple trees or something, like if you privately own it, then you have the incentive to replant it. So anyway, when you say it like that, it makes total sense. And yet there's these sort of myths that go along that, oh yeah, private business just chops down all the, would slaughter all the chickens tomorrow and sell them for, chicken meat. And then we would have no more chickens. But that's clearly not how ranchers and farmers think.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. And I think the problem of why that narrative has taken hold and why our side and our ideas have lost is because we've tried to compete with emotional arguments with facts and logic. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we do well at ACC is we start by telling people why we care about those issues as well. Like, yeah, we don't want deforestation. We don't want animal species to go extinct. We want to protect the outdoors for future generations. Like that's something that all humans share. Like we all want clean air and clean water and a beautiful environment that we can pass on to our kids and grandkids. That's a value that 99% of people share. So let's talk about the solutions that actually work. And I think we sometimes tended to say, oh, well, the Green New Deal sucks and these other ideas are stupid, and so therefore you should stop believing them. But people are like, well, that doesn't really resonate because you've not even told me why you care. And so a lot of what we try to do is establish that emotional credibility with people and show them we care, like show them firsthand, like the outdoors lifestyle. Like every time I'm out like skiing or hiking or camping, like I'm proud to post a picture and be like, hey, yeah, I'm out here enjoying what I believe is God's creation, and I want to protect this for the future. Here's how I believe we should do that. I think that disarms people and makes them much more willing to listen to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, you kind of led into something I was going to ask you about, so maybe if you can elaborate on that. And where I'm coming from is you don't have to take a stand one way or the other, but I personally am against what President Trump's doing with the recent tariffs, and certainly like the motivation and behind it. But I've gotten a lot of pushback from people, and they're saying, look at part of what's going on here, and a lot of you libertarian economists are just dumbfounded, like, geez, haven't we made the case for free trade? Is that there are genuine problems with what's happened to the U.S. manufacturing worker and things like this, and it's the middle class. And if you just come off as saying, well, your proposed solutions are stupid, but it seems like you don't really care one way or the other, and you're just sitting back with your arms folded saying, no, that's not going to help. That's not going to help. You're an idiot. That the feedback I've gotten from people close to me are saying, don't be surprised when someone who's genuinely concerned about something then starts listening to people who are offering what seems to be solutions, even if you can analyze them. So I don't think that's so. Likewise, that sounds like exactly what you just said, that if young people, especially who care about environmental issues and are concerned about climate change and whatnot, if what they think the conservative movement in America or the Republican Party or whatever is just to say, oh yeah, it's all a big hoax, don't worry about it, everything's fine, or even to go further and say, yeah, who cares about, oh, you're gonna go hug a tree? Okay, I'd rather have a shopping mall than have a forest. That if you hear people make jokes like that when they have that attitude, you can see why they would go into the opening, welcoming arms of the left. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right, and we just need to be able to make arguments in a way that resonate with people on a more visceral and emotional level. Obviously, like, represent the truth and like don't lie and don't kind of come up with stupid solutions just to make people happy. But you need to be able to communicate it in a way people understand that is also personal to them. And I think there's a huge opening on like some of the climate stuff. because I think so many environmentalists have overplayed their hand by talking about abstract things like net zero by 2050 or parts per million or greenhouse gases. And most people have zero clue what any of those things are. They have no personal relationship to them. And so people generally care about the environment. And so they're kind of like, okay, I'm not sure what this means, but okay. We have an opportunity to kind of make this personal. Be like, hey, the wildfires that are like putting your homes at risk every summer out west and maybe even every winter now, like that's a direct result of bad policy. Here's how we fix that. Like here's how we can make sure that your agricultural crops are more productive and not impacted by like changing weather patterns. Here's how we can make sure that like there's less pollution in your waterways or your local park is clean. Like if we can localize these issues and make it personal to people as opposed to abstract like net zero targets or talking about like international climate agreements in countries that people have never heard of or have never been to, like all of that stuff actually I think gives an opening for our side to appeal to them on a like truer level than the other side does.
Okay, and then even just to keep going on this theme here, I would imagine that even a conservative who really doesn't care that much about the environment per se, but just you could take it or leave it, that they should be glad there's a group like yours, because to realize there are plenty of people, particularly young people, that are concerned about those issues, and you certainly wouldn't want them to go and swell the ranks of leftist Democrats just because of a messaging problem. And so I could see somebody that they should be applauding what you're doing, even if that's not their particular cup of tea, just to realize if there's plenty of potential conservatives, and they're conservative because they care so much about the environment and realize the solutions that an AOC or somebody is pushing actually isn't going to help the environment.
Yeah, there's a lot of different issues that people care about. And for some people, this is not a top issue or top 5 or even a top 10 issue. And that's totally fine. I would venture to say that most people, maybe even all people, want clean air and clean water and a healthy environment. I think that's a fairly kind of basic thing, like I said before, but that doesn't mean it's your top political issue or that you necessarily really care. Like for some people, if you're struggling with inflation or making ends meet, talking about climate change is probably not really the thing that you care about. What I would say is totally understood. We are not a environmental movement that tries to cram everything under one thing and force people to care about things they don't necessarily care about that much. But from a political perspective, this does matter to a lot of people. It matters a lot to independents, to young people. There's some worrying statistics about how we did a poll a couple years ago and found that nearly half of young Republicans think that the Green New Deal is a good way to tackle climate change. Why is that? Because it's all they've ever been taught, all they've ever heard of. They've never been given an alternative. And my fear is that as over time we keep like losing on this issue, we're going to lose the voters that care about them. And at the same time, by the end of this decade, a majority of potential voters in America will be millennials and Gen Z. Older voters pass away and new voters come online. They overwhelmingly care about this stuff. And so we need to have a good answer. It's probably not going to be like the number one thing that we talk about all the time, and neither should we, because there's a lot of other issues that matter, but we should have good answers. Where possible, we should link it to other things. Like having abundant, reliable, affordable energy is critical for economic prosperity and economic growth. It is critical for national security, for competing with countries like China geopolitically. And so this does matter in many other ways that aren't just purely environmentally focused. And so we make those arguments and we show that even if this is not a top issue for you, you probably would want us to be successful in the work that we're doing, because we're building a coalition that's going to, in my view, help conservatives for the long run.
Okay, great. Folks, let's take a break from the action to discuss today's sponsor, who is Monetary Metals. Now, Monetary Metals offers you the ability to grow your wealth outside of the banking system and gain greater control over your finances through gold and silver. You can increase your precious metal content every single month. You get paid not in terms of dollars, but you get paid in physical ounces of gold and or silver. Monetary Metals is revolutionizing how people invest in these precious metals. Instead of paying to own your metal through storage costs and insurance, now you can get paid to own it. Now, right now, and this is new to the listeners of the Bob Murphy Show, there's an opportunity for you to earn 4% on gold, paid in gold, in Monetary Metals Marketplace. The interest you earn is paid in ounces of physical gold or silver, which you get in addition to any price appreciation from the metals that may occur during the year. So the question's this: Why would you want to earn in dollars when you can earn in gold? Join thousands of investors, including myself, who are earning interest in physical gold and silver every month at Monetary Metals. For more information, go to monetary-metals.com/Murphy. Once again, go to monetary-metals.com/Murphy. Just because you brought it up, I'm curious. So the obvious left-wing and standard messaging on like the California wildfires is, we've been telling you guys, we've been, pumping CO2 in the atmosphere for decades now. Extreme weather events just keep getting more and more frequent and severe. And then on top of that, you got these greedy insurance companies that pull out the last second there when they saw the writing on the wall. And then of course, local governments are underfunded. And this is just, you need bigger government and just more people like us in charge, and will prevent this sort of thing from happening.
Yeah. I will say that the science just doesn't really reflect that. Obviously, having warmer climates will make conditions drier and will have an impact on wildfires. But there is a much, much larger, like degrees of magnitude larger impact from mismanagement of forests. The vast majority of these wildfires are not started in a vacuum. They're started by humans, like 90% plus, whether it's like a firework gone wrong or someone forgot to put out their campfire or a transmission line. And those things happen. And a lot of this will be avoidable if we have better managed forests that stifle the fires as opposed to allow them to run rampant. And I think some of the numbers that were put on this is like, if we reduce emissions by a certain amount of, like a certain level by a certain date, we can impact like wildfires by like 6% or something like that. It's like, well, that's still a lot of wildfire left. And the management of the forest is by far the most important thing. And sure, over time, like if we can continue to bring down emissions and reduce the impact of climate change on the kind of drought that forests will experience, sure, they'll have some impact on the margins, but it's not even close to the primary issue here. And I think that it's really kind of baffling that the same environmentalists who make it almost impossible to manage our forests are the ones that are blaming climate change for the forest fires. And I think it's a huge moral failure. And places like California spent $20 billion in the last 5 years on homelessness, and just a fraction of that on managing forests and tackling wildfires. And the result is that a lot more people are homeless now. Thousands of people lost their homes and lose their homes every year because of these wildfires. And so the state is just literally going the opposite direction, despite spending billions of dollars on issues that like just aren't helping.
And maybe you want to give more nuanced answer here, but you mean, for example, just the big picture dichotomy that active forest management would go in and clear out the brush and whatnot, and then and maybe even allow a few fires here and there in order to to trim it and whatever, I don't know what the correct verb is, as opposed to just a complete hands-off. No, man is evil. Man should not interfere with pristine nature and just let it run. And then, of course, that means when a fire does break out, it just rips through.
Yeah. Thanks for pushing me on that. It's important for people to know that, like, what I mean by forest management. This is not rocket science. It's not new. Native and indigenous tribes across the world for like millennia have used forest management practices such as clearing out underbrush, doing preventative burns, thinning forests, all to make it harder for, if there is a wildfire, and there will be wildfires because that's kind of the cycle of nature, that it doesn't just tear through the forest, but that it kind of gets stopped because of the natural topography that you're able to help create in a forest. So if you look at the impact of a wildfire on a thinned forest that has been cleared versus a very dense forest that hasn't been touched, that forest, that the forest that hasn't been touched actually goes up in flames, and the wildfire is much worse than in the one that has been thinned because you've taken precautions to prevent that from happening. And so that is what we need to be doing. It's something that we've been doing, that indigenous tribes did for thousands of years. And the parts of the country that do that, typically on private land, see far fewer wildfires than the places that don't. And to the last point you made, it's a kind of preservationist mindset that sees humans as evil, the environment as good, and any human involvement or infringement upon the environment is inherently bad. And we completely reject that. We believe that actually conservation is a better approach, because conservation implies humans being involved and doing good things for the environment and actively managing it. And like, if you make an analogy with a garden, like if you have a garden that you never touch for 10 years, it's going to look like crap. But if you have a garden that you tend and you carefully like plant certain species here, and you kind of like water it well, and like you take care of it, it'll flourish. And we want an environment that's, yes, protected, but also improved and flourished. And not just an environment that's completely left alone, because left to its own devices, it's going to go up in flames, or something else is going to happen to it that's not good for the ecosystem.
So did you say you have 70,000 members?
Yeah, 75,000.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. So can you just give the listeners an idea of like if there's a chapter on a college campus, is it, I guess they have periodic meetings and maybe bring in speakers occasionally? Is that the kind of thing they do?
Yeah, so last year in 2024, we did 425 events across the country, so more than an event a day. And often those would be like a speaker on a college campus, or a debate, or a policy panel, or something like that. We also do kind of bigger events. We have an annual summit. This year it'll be outside Nashville at a state park. We do a fly into DC, where we bring some of our top leaders to go meet with members of Congress. We do state level like fly-ins to go to the state legislature to talk about priorities at that level. And then we also do outdoorsy things, like we'll do cleanups in a park, or we'll plant trees, or we'll do like oyster reef restoration efforts off the Florida coast. Like, part of our theory of change is that caring about the outdoors is taking responsibility for what you can control, and being a good steward of that, and being productive, as opposed to being a performative kind of activist that's angry on social media, blocking traffic, or throwing soup at paintings. Like, if you care, then get out and get dirty and touch grass and like do something. Don't just be upset and angry about it. And so a not insignificant amount of our events are just going outside, doing hikes, cleanups, planting trees, whatever it might be, that shows that we have a direct care for our communities as well. Okay,
great. Last question I have for you, Chris. I saw, just as I was looking at your website and seeing, and you recently were concerned about the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again movement, and the possible corporate pushback against Robert Kennedy Jr. Do you want to speak? Can you speak to that? Like what your thesis was?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's clear interest in this country, especially among a lot of young people and like young mothers and people that are concerned about kind of our food systems, of wanting to have healthier food systems that have fewer like chemicals, or fewer kind of things impacting it. And I'm not saying I agree with everything RFK is trying to do, but I think it's an important conversation to have. Like, we have a lot of money that's being spent, for example, through our food stamp systems, through SNAP, that is taxpayer dollars that are supposed to help with nutritional assistance. And a lot of that money goes towards sodas, for example. I think that's clearly terrible. I think if we're in schools feeding kids that are things that are nutritionally completely deficient, I don't think that's good either. And so a conversation needs to be had about what can actually be done to make people healthier in this country, reduce obesity and things like that.
Just a real quick, like it's a pretty trivial observation, but something that it was on my radar. Like, just if you go through and just look at like the so-called kids cereals and like how much sugar and stuff is in them. I mean, it's really amazing. And I don't know, I guess I kind of naively when I was younger would have thought, well, surely, the store wouldn't stock that, if it's so bad, like you wouldn't want to just give so much sugar to your kid. Anyway, I mean, I realize how naive and silly that sounds, but it wasn't until the last few years that it really struck me when I was looking at that and was like, wow, I'm not giving my kids this. And I wasn't giving it to them anyway, but anyway, just go ahead. It's kind of a silly observation.
Well, so it's absolutely correct. And the point I was making in that interview is that pushing back against that will kind of probably incur some corporate wrath, right? Because companies kind of make a lot of money off of this stuff. And for example, if you're in kind of the pharmaceutical industry, you probably make a lot of money off of like the birth control pill. We're not at all accounting for the fact that the chemicals in the birth control pill end up in a lot of our waterways and have impacts on the water that people drink, and often unhealthy levels of estrogen, especially for men. The impact of microplastics in water and food. Like there's just these negative externalities from our food system that are serious issues that we need to talk about. And there will be corporate pushback against that, I'm sure. And so we need to be willing to kind of have a conversation about, like, look, just because we believe in free enterprise and kind of the private sector typically leading on these things doesn't mean that you can just get away with endless negative externalities that have real public health impacts. So I think that's just a conversation that's starting in this country. And again, I don't think necessarily RFK is going to get it all right, but I think at the very least, it's a conversation that I welcome and that I think needs to be had.
And what's interesting, just on your point there, that to sort of consistent with your theme about it used to be historically that the left-wing Democrats sort of had the monopoly on environmental concern. It used to be in America that if you said, oh, one of the parties is going to be associated, going to have a few key figures that are really going after big pharma and stuff like that and worried about like all the profits in healthcare and how we need to watch out for the little guy. And everyone said, oh, that's got to be the Democrats, right? And no, actually right now it's the Trump administration. So it's just weird how much things have flipped. And of course, too, with Russia, like the Democrats and Republicans have switched. If you go watch the movie Dr. Strangelove, it's the right-wing, hardliners who are, so skeptical of Russia. So anyway, it's just odd how things have sort of gotten reversed since when I was, in high school, let's say.
Yeah. Shifting political coalitions. That's for sure.
Okay, well, folks, my guest has been Chris Barnard, the president of the American Conservation Coalition. So, Chris, where can you point people to if they want to learn more about all this?
Yeah, so our website is acc.eco. So very easy. You can look us up, and we have kind of membership opportunities. Like we can get involved with a local chapter in your community, whatever it might be, resources to learn more about this stuff. So that's on our website. Our Twitter is ACC_national. My personal Twitter is Chris Barnard DL. So you can just kind of follow the good work that we're doing over there.
Okay, thanks, Chris, for everything you guys have been doing, and thanks for your time today.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.